It's 1850. You're a completely normal person. You yawn in public. Congratulations. You have just been diagnosed as insane. Welcome to the Victorian asylum system, a place built on the revolutionary medical idea that maybe, possibly, mental illness was a real thing, and the slightly less revolutionary idea that literally anything could count as proof of it. Yawning, reading too many novels, being a woman with opinions, all committable offenses. Let's find out how you'd end up here, and whether you'd ever get out. Britain in the 1800s was obsessed with order. Factories ran on schedules. Cities were mapped. Behavior was supposed to be predictable. So when someone acted differently, grieved too loudly, argued too much, or just didn't fit, society didn't ask why. It asked, where do we put them? The answer, increasingly, was the asylum. Huge, imposing buildings, usually built just outside town, because nothing says, we care about you, like being architecturally exiled. So who ended up on the inside? Buckle up. Grief, overwork, religious excitement, epilepsy, alcoholism, menopause, reading novels, masturbation, yes, actually, disappointment in love, being poor, being inconvenient. If you were a woman in the 1800s, your odds got considerably worse. Doctors believed women's wombs could literally wander around their bodies causing madness. The medical term was hysteria, and it could be diagnosed for almost anything: crying, laughing, arguing with your husband, or simply existing with strong feelings. Husbands and fathers could have women committed with shockingly little pushback. Two doctors' signatures, sometimes obtained in minutes, and your wife, sister, or daughter could vanish for years. Some men used this to get rid of inconvenient wives entirely. It wasn't common enough to be routine, but common enough to be terrifying. Let's say it's you. You've been deemed not quite right. What happens next? Step 1. The carriage ride. No explanation required. You are simply going somewhere. Step 2. Arrival. The asylum looms, a fortress of brick, symmetry, and quiet dread. You're stripped of your clothes and your name. From here, you are a case number. Your head might be shaved, partly for hygiene, partly because Victorian doctors thought hair follicles could trap madness. No, really. Ah, yes, the hair, famously the source of insanity. You're examined, questioned, and assigned to a ward. Men and women were kept strictly separate. This was still Victorian Britain, after all, decorum above all. This wasn't entirely cruelty for cruelty's sake. It came from something called moral treatment, a genuinely progressive idea for the time. The theory, routine, fresh air, and productive labor could calm a disturbed mind. Some asylums had gardens, workshops, even dances. Sounds almost nice. It was not always nice. Let's tour the treatment room. Bloodletting. Doctors drained blood believing it relieved pressure on an overexcited brain. Purging. Induced vomiting and violent laxatives to flush out bad humors. The rotating chair. You'd be strapped in and spun at high speed until you vomited or passed out, believed to reset the nervous system. It did not reset the nervous system. It just made people dizzy and furious. The shower bath. Ice-cold water dropped or blasted onto restrained patients, sometimes as punishment disguised as therapy. Restraint chairs, straitjackets, and manacles were common, especially for patients deemed excitable. For all the Victorian talk of care, conditions in many asylums were overcrowded, understaffed, and grim. Some institutions genuinely tried to help. Others were dumping grounds for people society simply wanted gone. Okay, so what did an average day actually look like if you weren't being spun in a chair? 6 a.m. Wake up, wash in cold water. 7 a.m. Breakfast, usually bread, gruel, weak tea. 8 a.m. to noon. Work. Men often did farm labor or trade work. Women did laundry, sewing, or cleaning. Labor wasn't optional. It was considered essential to your recovery, and conveniently, it also kept the asylum running for free. Afternoon, more work or supervised recreation, walks, reading, sometimes music. Evening, dinner, quiet time, lights out early. Repeat. Every day, for as long as the doctors decided you needed it. And that's the part that should really worry you. There was no fixed sentence. No release date. Getting out required doctors to agree you were cured, and definitions of cured were flexible. Some patients spent months inside. Some spent literally the rest of their lives. Committed for grief in 1860? Best case. Released a year later, deemed recovered. Worst case. Still there in 1890. An old woman who barely remembers why she was sent in the first place. This wasn't just theoretical. Real people lived this. Some patients wrote letters smuggled out describing being committed after disputes with family members who simply wanted them out of the way. Journalists occasionally went undercover inside asylums and published shocking accounts of neglect and abuse. Public outrage would follow, briefly, before fading. Reform campaigners pushed for inspections, patient rights, and legal oversight throughout the century. And slowly, very slowly, things did start to improve. Later in the century, some asylums moved toward more humane, structured care, better food, supervised recreation, less brutal treatment. Superintendents like those pioneering non-restraint approaches argued patients recovered faster without chains and cold water. It wasn't universal. It wasn't fast. But the seed of modern psychiatric care was planted here. Badly, painfully, but planted. Of course, improvement is relative. You could still be committed for reading too many novels well into the later 1800s. Victorian doctors really did not like novels, especially sensational ones. Too exciting for a delicate female mind, apparently. So, back to you, our hypothetical Victorian inmate. Let's say you actually behave, work hard, and convince the doctors you're cured. Release day. You walk out the gates, back into a world that now knows exactly where you've been. The stigma didn't end at the asylum wall. Former patients were often shunned, unable to find work, treated as permanently touched. For some, the fear of that stigma was worse than the asylum itself. So why does any of this matter now? Because the Victorian asylum system is really the awkward, brutal adolescence of modern psychiatry. The instinct to help people wasn't fake. The tools to do it just didn't exist yet, and the ones that did were shaped by ignorance, class, and deeply Victorian ideas about gender and control. By the early 1900s, many of these massive asylums housed thousands of patients each, some of the largest medical institutions in the world. Most were finally closed or transformed in the 20th century, as psychiatry shifted toward outpatient care and, eventually, actual evidence-based treatment. So next time you yawn in public, be grateful you live in a century where that's just a yawn. The Victorian asylum wasn't one thing. It was a mirror, reflecting exactly what a society feared, misunderstood, and wanted to hide away. Some people inside were genuinely unwell and needed help nobody knew how to give. Others were just inconvenient. Too loud, too sad, too female, too poor. And the line between those two groups depended less on medicine, and a lot more on who was signing the paperwork. Speaking of paperwork nobody wanted to deal with, there's another Victorian institution just as strange, just as brutal, and somehow even less talked about. The workhouse. Where being simply poor could get you locked up too. Same century, same fear of undesirables. Very different kind of nightmare. If you want that video next, let me know in the comments. History's weirdest, saddest, most quietly hilarious corners, explained simply. Like, subscribe, and maybe, don't yawn too loudly out there. See you in the next one.